What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Invincible Iron Man and Fall of X. And the ending of this, I feel like it's going to blow your all's minds. It's crazy, especially if you're knowledgeable about the X-Men. But what this does is this picks up with James Rhodes in prison. Now, this is one of the things that we haven't really talked about too much in the Iron Man comics, but the long and short of this is that for those of you guys who are catching up, basically you had a guy named Fei Long who ended up taking over Stark Industries, and he ended up using Stark tech to build these gigantic 50-foot tall Iron Man suits, effectively Sentinels, that could help Orchis in tracking down the X-Men in the entirety of the Fall of X event, right? Finding different mutants, killing them, or imprisoning them. The funny thing here is that during the early days when this happened, Tony Stark and James Rhodes went on a mission to find out how far along Fei Long was in building up these Stark Tech Sentinels. In the process, James Rhodes is basically busted and arrested. Now, Fei Long has played a kind of game using James Rhodes as a sort of pawn against Tony Stark in the sense that he's always trying to take these pot shots, sometimes to demonstrate he can kill James Rhodes anytime he wants to, other times to actually take out James Rhodes legitimately. And this is one of those times when he tries to do it. Now, the crazy thing here is that basically James Rhodes gets a phone call in jail. And when that happens, it's basically Tony Stark who's supposed to be calling him. The funny thing is that during that time, Tony Stark is handed a phone and saying he's got a phone call. So somebody's basically connected the two and tricked each one into believing that the other called them. Now, Tony Stark figures out pretty fast that it's Fei Long, right? He's the one that's basically doing that. And then James Rhodes gets into a kind of fight out in the prison yard. Now, one of the things to also know is it's not really Tony Stark's fault that James Rhodes got arrested. It kind of was, but it wasn't. It was more of the circumstance. There have been times in the past in Marvel when like Tony Stark just makes James Rhodes the sacrificial lamb and just like gets him arrested. Right? Tony Stark is a terrible friend to James Rhodes, if we're being honest. But once he realizes that Fei Long is kind of doing this as a game, it's really just to kind of have Tony Stark on the phone, listening to James Rhodes getting beaten to death inside of a prison. And so immediately, Tony Stark goes to attack Fei Long, only for Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, to get in his way, right? To literally show up and just say, a word, Mr. Stark. And when Tony tells him to leave, he says, the arrangements you commissioned from me were implemented in the Polonsky unit several days ago, only for us to end up finding out James Rhodes has help. And it comes in the form of Sandman, dude. Sandman was sent into that prison to protect James Rhodes. This is how you use a villain like Sandman, to be honest, right? This is how you use Flint. It's awesome to see this happen, right? Then you end up having Arthur Parks, who shows up, the Living Laser. Both of these guys intentionally got themselves arrested and sent to this prison on behalf of the request of Wilson Fisk, so they could basically protect James Rhodes. Now, understand here, these guys are not doing it because like they're altruistic, right? Like it's the right thing to do. James Rhodes is a superhero. On any normal circumstance, they'd be happy to see this guy get killed. But as we know with Wilson Fisk, while he is traditionally a villain of Daredevil and was originally a villain of Spider-Man, in more recent years, he basically worked his way onto the X-Men team by marrying Typhoid Mary, who is a mutant, and is now part of the Hellfire Club, right? A kind of inner circle that's working against Orchis and those groups out there trying to destroy the mutant population. And so Wilson Fisk getting a hold of these guys, they did it because they were likely promised something at some future point in time. Either that or most likely it was money. Of course, they'll end up being broken out or something along those lines and they'll be back to their normal lives, but it was most likely cash, right? Cold hard cash. That's really what it was, if I'm being a betting man. But of course, Fei Long's given the news about the fact that James Rhodes survived the whole thing, and of course he's pissed off. Now, the cool thing that goes on here is we jump back to the conclusion of the last video that we covered, which was basically Hazel. Now, Hazel is Emma Frost of the X-Men masquerading as just a regular person. Honestly, she's got the whole like super hot librarian vibe going on, right? Like, so that's really cool. But in essence, she is kind of hiding in plain sight. She wears a ring that's kind of an inhibitor ring. So basically it prevents anybody from being able to detect her mutant power and her being able to use her mutant power at all. But once she realizes Fei Long is there, Fei Long's part of Orchis, and Orchis is targeting the mutant population, even if destroying Fei Long isn't necessarily going to bring an end to everybody hunting for mutants across the world, at the very least, it is an anti-mutant guy that she can kill on the spot and take a lot of her frustration out on. So as we saw in the previous video, Tony Stark leads her into a room in order to talk to her. She knees him in the balls. He falls down on his knees, only for Fei Long to walk in, and then they immediately improvise. He proposes. He just like makes it look like a proposal, because honestly, it's the most logical thing to do. He's got a ring in his hand, he's on one knee, she's standing up. Might as well make it look good. And so probably for the first and only time in Tony Stark's entire life, he gets like the one chick he's been down bad for, Emma Frost. And let's be honest with ourselves, there's not a straight guy in the entirety of Marvel Comics who wouldn't give virtually anything to get a night with Emma Frost. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, she's like that in Marvel. But the thing about this is that there's a kind of back and forth here, right, with Fei Long. It's not overly important, but it does kind of feed into the game the two of them are playing. One of the things to know is that they could just have like a knockdown, drag out fight. That could happen. But the problem is Fei Long's the CEO of Stark Industries. So if he's seen out in the street getting into a fight, obviously it would lead people to question the leadership of Stark Industries. That would lead to a drop in Stark Industries value. And of course, he'd probably be ousted as the CEO by the board of directors. Tony Stark can't necessarily do that because he's flat broke. So who's going to defend him, right? I mean, that guy's going to end up in jail, and there'll be nobody out there who is a non-mutant trying to help the mutant population outside of the Uncanny Avengers, right? Captain America's Avengers team. So what ends up happening is, with this kind of back and forth, one of the things that a lot of people who are unfamiliar with Tony Stark don't know, he is at his absolute most dangerous when he's backed into a corner. Tony Stark, whenever you're facing off against Tony Stark in any kind of situation, you want to be facing off against him when he believes he has like 50 potential ways to win, right? That's the Tony Stark you want to fight against, because that's the one who's reckless. That's the one who's kind of devil may care and might get carried away with himself and potentially offer you an opening. The Tony Stark who feels like he has only one way to win, that's the guy who stops joking. That's the guy who stops playing. Even though he's here drinking martinis, it's all a show, right? Like, this is him just acting. It's just him pretending, right? That Tony Stark who feels like he only has one option will be laser focused on that one way to take you out. And how foolish would you have to be to piss off the second smartest man in the world so badly that you become his just pure, unadulterated, only focus, that destroying you is the only thing he cares about. It's probably the dumbest thing that a person could do. And Fei Long doesn't realize how badly he's screwed up, because everything that you see happening right now is all going according to plan for Tony Stark. It's going exactly the way that he expected it to. And so where people are asking the question like, wow, Tony Stark's getting married? That's kind of weird, right? The billionaire superhero playboy who's not really a billionaire anymore, and he's basically flat broke, but hey, you know, that kind of thing. Whoever thought he would have settled down? Him and Emma Frost basically take off to Vegas in order to get hitched. Now in this moment, right, you have Fei Long who asks Tony Stark, can I come to the wedding? His response is no. But the reason why he says that is because he knows Fei Long will take that rejection as a challenge, and he'll show up anyway, and he'll be the only one who does. So the two of them take off to Vegas, right, in order to get hitched, because that's just kind of what you do. And then Tony Stark puts on his nil armor. Now the nil armor of Tony Stark is some really, really cool Stark tech. It's not like the uber suit he's working on, and the end of this will tell us exactly what's going to be in that suit, and it's going to blow your mind when we get to that point. But the nil armor is basically a kind of like espionage suit, right? It's the suit he puts on when he wants to sneak in somewhere. It's not really as powerful as a lot of the other suits are, but it gets the job done. The reason why this matters is because he goes to the base of operations for Zeke Stane, the son of Obadiah Stane, basically the former villain of Iron Man before his death, and his son took over the Empire. Zeke Stane's not important here. You're not going to see him at all in this story, but he is incredibly capable. It's one of the things to know. Among the different villains that Tony Stark has, you have Ezekiel Stane, you've got Justin Hammer, right? You have people out there who were very, very capable and always gunning for Stark tech and always trying to find a way to work against him. Such as it is, he's able to basically steal a whole bunch of technology from Ezekiel, which can be used to effectively build up a new Iron Man suit, gets a hold of Captain America, and then has him send a member of the Uncanny Avengers to pick up all this stuff, which turns out to be Deadpool. And in the most Deadpool response ever, this is the only time he shows up, right? I love it when Deadpool has like these tiny cameos where he's wearing like a hat and he's got a mustache over his mask because, you know, Deadpool comics. But I love this little cameo here because he's like, okay, I'll get whatever this is back to the Morlock tunnels for you because that's kind of where they meet in secret. But maybe I could stay for your big day, right? I was married once, and Iron Man's just like, leave Deadpool. And he's like, okay, goodbye. Because the reality here is, once Deadpool starts talking, that dude's not gonna shut the hell up, man. Like, he doesn't know how to be quiet, right? He'll just talk your ear off forever. And I love it. And so in the following day, once Tony Stark returns, he shows up to like this little chapel of love, right? Gamble of love. And him and Emma Frost basically are in the process of getting hitched, only for Fei Long to bust in, right? To just kind of crash the thing and be like, I couldn't say no. Boom, trap set, trap activated. At that point, Emma Frost takes off her ring, uses her telepathy, takes over the minds of Tony Stark, the priest, and Fei Long. Now she knows right off the bat, as does Tony Stark, this guy's gonna have psychic blocks in place. And that's an important thing to understand for non-comic book readers. Telepathy is so well known to the general public, 99% of people don't care. But for those who run like companies or like political officials, especially high-ranking officials, so like different dictators across the world, the president of the United States, certain members of Congress who are privy to like exceedingly classified and sensitive information, these people will have mental blocks designed to help resist telepathy. It doesn't completely and totally shut it down, but it does allow them to offer some measure of resistance. And so in this instance, when they enter into the mind of Fei Long, that as we had seen in a previous Iron Man comic, Fei Long, once he took over Stark Industries, had gotten his hands on this kind of video message that was recorded by Howard Stark for Tony, but as soon as Fei Long watched it, he torched it, so Tony Stark could never see it. This is a chance for him to see it. And what we get here, and this is one of the coolest things, because we speculated about this, that it looked like he was going to the far shore, and he kind of is. Howard Stark talks about how he had basically discovered a kind of metal, right? He says, I don't have the discovery in my hand yet because my prize lies beyond. It's a metal outside our periodic table that should not exist because it's outside of our universe. If I'm successful, this metal could be more significant to humanity than iron was to our ancestors. So he says a kind of goodbye to Tony Stark and tells him, I'm sorry that my work kept me away from you, but you were always my greatest achievement, i.e. basically the message that we saw in like Iron Man 2, right? So that's essentially what this is. But once the mental blocks of Fei Long kick in, keeping in mind all of this is happening in Fei Long's mind right now, the mental projection of Fei Long attacks Tony Stark, and then Emma Frost steps in and kind of shuts his mind down. But then she starts asking a question, right? Why does this guy hate mutants so much, right? It's one thing when he was talking about the idea that like the mutant population kind of screwed up his attempt to try to terraform Mars when mutants claimed the planet for themselves before he could, but that's not enough of a reason to want to eradicate everybody in existence, right? Like the person at the grocery store taking the last bag of Pop-Tarts isn't really enough for you to like kill them and their family and friends and anybody that they ever met, right? It's just not really enough to initiate that kind of vendetta. So what she does is she starts probing his mind. And this is the answer that a lot of you guys have been asking about with regards to Fei Long. And so what she finds out here is that Fei Long was born to mutant parents, but he himself did not have any powers. And so what they realize is that his parents loved him for who he was. He resented them for what he wasn't. He wanted powers. He wanted abilities. This whole thing is literally just an ego trip. It's a guy who just feels inferior to the people around him and trying to drag down those individuals who are superior to him to his level so he can feel more capable, right? Like instead of being better, he wants other people to be as bad as he is, or at least as low as he sees himself. And so it's a very simple motivation, but I love that Jerry Dugan did this because this is what Chris Claremont would have done back in like the 70s and 80s. It's exactly what he would have done. Not some grand scheme for world domination or anything like that. It's just the guy feels inept in the face of a mutant population that challenges his very existence. Now, in this moment, Emma Frost almost considers using her telepathy to force this guy into telling the truth. But what she realizes is that if she were to do that, and if another telepath that works for Orchis were to come along and scan his mind, they would realize a different telepath had been here. They wouldn't know it was Emma Frost, but they would know that a telepath had been inside his head. And then at that point, it's very easy for him to say, well, I didn't actually mean it. I was forced to say it by a telepath, because you know those mutants, they can't be trusted. And the whole of the human population sides with him, and it was all for nothing. And if anything, it makes things worse for the mutant population, right? So the smart move by Emma Frost is to just kind of let things lie and then essentially walk away. Now, following that with the whole like fake mirrors that doesn't actually happen, as this closes, the two of them drive away. And there's a really cool conversation, right? Tony Stark says not to get right back to work, but Mysterium, what is that, right? Because Emma Frost had kind of made this offhanded remark in saying that metal that your dad was talking about having found, that sounds like Mysterium, right? When she answers this, she says, your father had clearly nosed onto it, but I suspect he never got his hands on any. It's a metal that's only available to be mined by mutants from a place outside space and time that we call the White Hot Room. We were using it as more soft power after the terraforming of Arakko. Why does the White Hot Room matter? Well, one, the White Hot Room exists beyond the far shore, right? The far shore is kind of like this realm in Marvel Comics. It's the very edge of all space and time. It was previously believed that beyond the far shore is where like the One Above All resided, and maybe out there somewhere he does. But beyond the far shore is also the White Hot Room. That's where the Phoenix Force operates in Marvel Comics, right? This kind of sum total of all life and psychic energy that has ever, currently does, or will ever exist. A source of astronomical power. Now, the nature of Mysterium, as we've seen from the Sword comics in Marvel in recent years and so on, it's not like this all-encompassing, all-indestructible metal, but it is comparable to secondary adamantium. That was presented to us in the Sword comics. What does that mean? It's not as durable as Wolverine's adamantium skeleton, but it's pretty freaking close. In effect, Iron Man is getting ready to build an adamantium Iron Man suit, and that is going to be dope. With that being said, guys, if you need to get caught up on Fall of X, make sure you guys click this link to the playlist, and I will catch you all later. Peace.